Baldur's Gate 3. Every now and again, the games industry cooks up something real nice, and we have this masterpiece of a game that's released. So, what game is it this year? Turns out it's Baldur's Gate 3. So, everyone seems to be talking about this game, and I've recently started playing it with Jared. Been having a blast in it. This game is so much fun. One of the things that I've been asking myself over and over and over again while I'm playing this game, though, and I've been wondering the answers myself, is why is this game so popular right now? Like, why do so many people love this game so much? And why does it stand out so much in contrast to the rest of the video game industry right now? Why is it such an eye-catching piece that everyone is sort of keeping their eye on, kind of paying attention to? So, with that being said, today I would like to ask the question, what makes Baldur's Gate 3 so good? And I think this is multi-pronged. I think there are a few things that the game has going for it that are really, really good and works strongly in its favor. So I'd like to go over those today and answer that question. I think a good place to start would be the game's graphics. Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't have like outstanding graphics. It stands out in terms of like your average AAA title. Like it does look pretty good for like a multi-100-hour RPG. Most of the time, developers go out of their way to like crank up the eye candy so that you can have something really nice to look at. And AAA developers kind of have this habit of wanting to flex on every single other game out on the market, and they want to be the most competitive graphically in the gaming space. We see that with Sony titles like God of War Ragnarok. We see that with Horizon Forbidden West, even PC games like Detroit Become Human. Developers have this habit of wanting to flex their graphical muscle. They want to flex their game engine a bit, and they want to see how gamers react to an ultra-realistic, or rather a game that has the best graphics on the market. And what I think people are considering graphics, sometimes they're confusing for style. This is a good point to bring up with Baldur's Gate. Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't have amazing graphics. Don't dislike, please don't hop out the video. Let me explain a bit. Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't have the best graphics, and it doesn't need to. And I think actually if it had ultra-realistic graphics, like in something like a God of War, or in something like a Horizon Forbidden West, or Detroit Become Human, I think that would actually work against its favor. In this case, I think that would detract from the style choice, because I don't think they're going for ultra realism here like a lot of those other games are, where they try to crank up the graphical fidelity as much as they can. They try to crank up the detail in the game. Baldur's Gate 3 makes a style choice in that, you know, it's a fantasy world RPG. It is a fantasy epic. The color palette of it is very vibrant. It doesn't need to compete with God of War or any other AAA game in terms of graphical fidelity, because it has art style working for it. It has art style doing the heavy lifting for it. The world of Baldur's Gate, the style choice of it, actually, when looking at it, when you look at the open world and you look at the detail in the mountains, in the rivers, in the beaches, in the foliage, in the characters' faces even, for me at least, inspires images of something like a Horizon Zero Dawn, or something like a fantasy epic like Dragon Age. I think one of the main things that Baldur's Gate 3 has going for it is that not that it is a graphical powerhouse, but that the graphical style is conducive to the player being immersed into the world. And the player being immersed into the world is important in an RPG, and I feel like a lot of AAA developers have lost the plot in terms of what makes a good AAA RPG, when it literally translates to role-playing game. And I think every RPG going forward should use Baldur's Gate 3 as a handbook. Not even just fantasy RPGs, but any RPG in general going forward, where you feel so immersed in the world around you, and you feel so immersed with the characters that you're talking to, the people that you're interacting with every action that you're doing, every thought that you're having about this world. I feel like every single thing that this world has going for it contributes to that sense of being fully immersed in the game. And that's actually the second thing I want to talk to you guys about, which is immersion, which is the main thing I think Baldur's Gate 3 has going for it, and the reason why a lot of people love it so much. Because, like I said, this is a role-playing game, and because, you know, it's inspired by the D&D universe. It's come from a rich background of Wizards of the Coast's IP, Dungeons and Dragons. Being based on an IP like Dungeons and Dragons, I think we knew inherently that there was going to be an immense immersive feeling for being a tabletop role-playing game translated into a video game format. But I don't think people expected this level of immersion in the way that the world sort of like creates a barrier or a safety blanket around the player, which I think is what these games like The Last of Us and God of War, and I'm going to keep saying God of War, what these games end up trying to do is they try to force a feeling of immersion by going for an ultra realistic graphical style, and they try to like shoehorn the player into feeling immersed in it because it looks so realistic. Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't do that. Instead, it focuses on not just graphical style or art style of the game, it focuses on different elements that are pulled directly from D&D. One of the things that I can think about is how fleshed out the characters of the story are, and how grounded and how they kind of present themselves as salt of the earth people to the player, at least, where you feel like this is a grounded role-playing experience and you feel invested to keep talking to these characters. You become interested when you play Baldur's Gate 3 in these characters' backstories. And because they have so much, not build up, but they have so much background story to pull from because of the dialogue that takes place in the game with each of your companions, with each of the NPCs that are talked to in the game. That is one of the main factors that contributes to this sense of immersion. That the world in Baldur's Gate 3, it is respected by the developers, and they consider this world to be real. I mean, look at their UELA agreement. Look at their EULA agreement. It is just a bunch of parody speak ripped directly from Baldur's Gate 3. It looked like it was written directly from one of the characters from the game. Like, this is the level of commitment and immersion they're trying to put the player into. They want the player to feel like this is a big fantasy epic adventure. They want the player to feel like this is a place where they can just commit to that sense of pleasant escapism and just go into this world and feel like a safety blanket has been sort of formed around them. One of the things that I ended up doing shortly after you escape the Nautiloid in the beginning of the game, in my playthrough of this game with Jared, is I play a bard character, or one of the things that you can end up finding directly after you land on the beach, that the Nautiloid crashes nearby. One of the things that you end up finding is you find an old sea shanty. It's called like the Sea Bitch or something like that, and I thought the writing was hilarious, and I just like improv the song like with Jared. It was just the two of us, so I was just bullshitting this sea shanty song and like coming up with like a rhythm and a melody and stuff like that. That's one of the reasons that I feel like this game immediately made me feel so comfortable to do that, because I was a bard character. I felt like I should continue to play this role. I feel comfortable being fully immersed in this game, and I feel like I want to be on the receiving end of that. Like when you have a self-made character that is built up completely on your own, or you have a custom character, especially when you have a custom character that you can craft your own backstory, you can craft basically anything you want of this character, your own stats and everything, which is boilerplate RPG stuff, I understand. That's one of the things that contributes to this huge sense of immersion. That ties into the third point, which I think is a strength of Baldur's Gate 3, which is the characters. All the companions, and even beyond the companions, like the NPCs that you guys meet, like Late Cell, Astarion, Karlach, I haven't met her yet, but Karlach, Late Cell, Shadowheart, Gale, like all these people that you interact with, I keep saying that they feel grounded, but that's really what the point I want to drive home. Like, these people feel real. You want to learn more about them. You want to develop relationships with them. These characters let you know how they feel. One of the ways that they let you know how they feel, it's a little gamey. It's a little like game mechanic-y, but like you'll have this little thing that appears, this little notification that appears in the top left or right of your screen when you're playing. Whenever you commit an action, like say like you're going to steal something from somebody, like you say like you're going to pickpocket like a child or something like that, there are certain people that will look at that action, like Late Cell or Astarion, and they'll be like, Astarion approves or Astarion disapproves. And this is one of the ways that like the players let you know how they feel. Like, they actually have their own opinions on almost everything, it seems like, in the game that you do. Like, your actions have real consequences, and not in the same way that like a Life is Strange type game would imply that would affect the ending, but like in a way that feels more immediate. You know, like in a game like Life is Strange, you don't always necessarily see the effect of your actions until the end. And this, you have a way that you can sort of see how your actions shape these people's opinions of you, and you can sort of see how, based off of what you end up doing, you can sort of see what sort of relationship you guys are going to have going forward. Like, these are real people with real opinions, and the choices you make will affect how they feel about you. Whether or not they're in your party, they will disapprove or approve of your actions depending on what you do, depending on the choices you make. The romance options are just another way. It's like icing on the cake, and I feel like, I feel like an RPG like this would suffer if romance options weren't present in the game. I feel like that's good for the player. I feel like that's necessary for them to have maximum level of enjoyment that they can in this. And freedom of expression, freedom of, just like freedom of gameplay, I feel like is necessary for romance options to be present in this game. I feel like it would suffer a lot if it didn't have those present. The voice acting, oh, the voice acting and the dialogue in this game is just perfect. Like, the actors and actresses in this game take this stuff so seriously, and I love that they do, um, because we're gonna keep going back to immersion because it's the best thing about Baldur's Gate. Like, it's that role playing experience. Like, it's that feeling that I am this character and these are the people that I am involved with, and there's a story. We're going off on adventures together. Let's go. That's one of the ways that the dialogue choices, like the unique dialogue choices that come from what class you're built on, that come from whatever your stats are, your high stats at least. Like, maybe you're wise and you want to offer some advice to somebody, or maybe you're a bard like me and you want to like take an artistic sort of like viewpoint on something. Even the dialogue options and the way that the developers crafted them have a way of influencing um how the player looks at Baldur's Gate and how the player looks at characters. Even it influences the structure of the game as a whole. Which brings me to number 4 that we're talking about, why this game is so good, and it's the game design. There are so many things that the developers chose for this game that just immediately they just work. This game prioritizes ease of access while still awarding skilled players, I feel like. That being said, it could feel a little overwhelming if you've never done a big fantasy RPG like this before. I know I was looking at the combat menu and I was like, what is that? I think that's one of the things that this game just does really well. Like, the combat system in particular, like the turn-based combat, it feels really satisfying. Like, and I'm usually not a fan of turn-based combat. Like, I usually find it really tedious. Like, I'm not really a Pokemon fan. Like, I wasn't really into it. Like, I dabble in it here and there. It takes work for me to like actually enjoy turn-based combat. This is combat that I actually enjoy. So that should tell you something about how good the combat in Baldur's Gate actually is. Combined movement and the various actions you can take, like, I find it so hilarious that you can not only do specific actions like attack, defend, cast magic, cast spells, use projectiles, that sort of thing, and you can move. You can use movement points as well, or I think they're called movement points, I'm not sure. You can also do like things that your character in your class would do. Like, for example, like I'm a bard, and one of the things that I often do that I think is just, it's just hilarious when I'm able to, like, after my turn is supposedly done and I can no longer attack or I can no longer move, I have no movement left, I just whip out my lute and I just start railing on it. Like, I just start playing a song to like rile up my homies in my party and just start going to town against our attackers. Like, I love that. I love that they give you that option, and when immersion is broken, I feel like it's for the sake of enjoyment and it's for the sake of convenience. One of the ways that I think immersion is broken that actually work in Baldur's Gate's favor in the game design choices that it's made is the ability to just send items that you pick up directly to your another person in your party's inventory. Like sometimes I found like clothes or food or camp supplies that I didn't really need or I didn't really want, and I was like, oh, I'll just send them to Jared, because you can literally pull up the menu when you click on it and you can literally just send it to anyone else in your party. And I think that that's amazing. I think every single game should adopt that feature, because it is so convenient to not have to like notify your friend and they have to walk all the way over to where you are so they can pick it up and it goes into their inventory. Rather, you could just send it directly to their inventory if you don't want it. It makes exchanging items so much easier. and it makes the whole process of like inventory management in a game so much easier. I think it's great. Every single RPG that has an inventory system should adopt that. That is one of the most useful mechanics I've seen. I don't know if that's been pioneered by Baldur's Gate 3. It's probably not, but that's one of the best ways I've seen it implemented here. Oh my god. One big thing that everyone has probably been screaming at me in the comments to mention is the dice mechanic, the dice roll mechanic. Like, how much more faithful to an IP can you get to than Baldur's Gate 3 can to D&D by bringing in like a skill check mechanic with a 20-sided die? Like, I don't know how you can be more faithful to the IP than that. It is so nerve-wracking, but it is so rewarding when you finally nail a dice roll or you nail a skill check in Baldur's Gate 3. Like, it is so satisfying when you finally get it. It is also hilarious to watch people fail at them and fail spectacularly. I remember a couple times, I think it was like one or two times this happened, but Jared and I were playing, and I think he was trying to use wisdom on somebody, and the skill requirement was like 10 with, it was a minimum of 10 he had to roll, and then he was like, I got this, rolls a 1, and then just immediately critically fails. And that's one of the things that I think this game can create so many fun memories if you just allow it to do its thing. You kind of like turn your brain off, not in a bad way, but like you turn your brain off to like problems outside of the game. Like, you are able to just focus on this. The movement and the feel of the game is just this old school ass RPG from like the MS DOS days. Like an isometric RPG like this like calls back like things to like the old Wastelanders games, and like even like Fallout 1 and 2. Like, I feel like more games need to adopt this isometric style or this isometric viewpoint in the future, because I feel like it's widely underused. But conversely, I feel like that's why Baldur's Gate 3 hit so hard, because it had an isometric movement system. The unique dialogue options that are presented in Baldur's Gate 3 offer so many opportunities for replayability. Even like quest options, like even the ways you can handle a quest, like they offer so much replayability value because there are so many different ways that you can handle a quest, and that you want to see them all. And this is why, like I say, like this builds in replayability value, and it's kind of part of the package with this game. And that brings me into number 5, which is the story. The story of Baldur's Gate 3 is a simple one, I feel like. Like, you have this mind flayer parasite inside you that gets inserted on the nautiloid, and your goal is to get it out before you turn into one of these mind flayer things, these mind flayer monsters. One of the things that the story does is it shrouds the player in this air of mystery. Like, player and the character that they're playing as are basically in the same boat, in that as little information as presented to them as possible, for the sake of discovering things at the same time. It would be what I would call exposition or expository value. The main story is simple, but it doesn't have to be complicated to be good. And I think that's the strength on Baldur's Gate 3 as well. And it's not like it needs a complicated story, at least at the start. Like, I have not finished this game yet. You can literally pull 300 hours if you're doing like a full completionist run, which is what I plan to do. I am not there yet. I want to take my time. I want to see everything this game has to offer. But I don't think this game needs a complicated storyline, even if it does get complicated, because the side quests in this are literally like their own self-contained stories. And sometimes they're related as well. Like, they influence points of the story as well. I haven't seen a game since Red Dead Redemption 2 that had the ability to generate random events as well as Red Dead 2 did. Because Red Dead 2, you just stumble upon like a man like pissing on the sidewalk, or like a drunk man ready to like jump off of a boulder, or a bear attacking you in the woods. Like, all these things can happen in Red Dead 2. I feel like that level of randomness and that level of just happenstance occurs in Baldur's Gate 3. Like, I'll give you an example. Me and Jared stumbled across these cultists or something like that, or I think they're called something like the True Mind, literally in the middle of the woods. Like, this guy is like dying on the side of the road, and I would have never have known that if we didn't take that path. And as far as I know, like there are so many more random events in Baldur's Gate 3 that are like that. It's so good for the player, I think, to just like get lost in the world. I love games and just like like franchises in general where you can just like get lost in the sauce, man. Where you can just fully escape into the world, and it's a role-playing game, and I think it's the fullest embodiment of what a role-playing game could be, and I think that's why people identify and love Baldur's Gate 3 so much. The sheer amount of choices and the sheer amount of lore, of care that went into this game is unparalleled. Like it's almost unprecedented, the level of care and the level of detail that went into this game. And that brings me to my final point, which is the contrast that this brings to the rest of the games industry. I think Baldur's Gate 3 is such an immense exception to the rule at this point for the games industry, because look at companies like Activision Blizzard, look at companies like EA that churn out these bug-riddled messes, and they release them on launch broken, and they just expect to fix them over time, and people buy them anyway. Like, this is the culture that we find ourselves in gaming in 2023, and I feel like a studio like Larian Studios got into the development process for Baldur's Gate 3 and said, we are not going to be like that, we are going to be the exception to the rule. Even their early access period, like, it had some people sweating, because sometimes, like, in early access periods that take player feedback, like Baldur's Gate 3 did, sometimes the results don't turn out so well. They end up scrapping the feedback. They sometimes, or something somewhere ends up usually going wrong in an early access period that takes player feedback. Baldur's Gate 3 didn't. Baldur's Gate 3 incorporated a lot of stuff from like the community, from the player feedback, from the surveys that were given in that early access period. There was such, and you can tell that it landed in the right hands, and I'm so glad that Larian was the studio that got the Baldur's Gate license. They handled it with such care, just passion for the craft. They wouldn't let this be a bug-riddled mess at launch, or just in general. Like, that's why so many people love this. They've got game developers sweating in their boots right now because of how successful this has been, and the sheer amount of content and the quality of it that Larian Studios, like, come on, the amount of content and the quality of it that Larian has provided to the gaming community for $60, like, which is what like standard game pricing has been for the last like 20 years or something like that. This is why so many people are saying this should set the standard for what AAA games should be going forward. This is what people should strive towards. Like, take a page out of Larian's book, and I fully agree with that. But it bothers me the attitude that so many developers end up taking towards the game development experience, where they feel like they can just release broken games and people will just buy them. Like, and that's why I'm so thankful for Larian Studios for creating Baldur's Gate 3, because it was created with this level of detail and this meticulous attention to the IP, and this love and respect that they have for the source material that it's pulling from. And I feel like because of all these things working in its favor, the level of immersion that takes place in the game, the characters that they crafted, the dialogue that was written, the voice acting recorded, like, all this stuff adds up to a masterpiece of a game. And I feel like Baldur's Gate 3 could take Game of the Year. I don't know. You guys tell me. Do you think this thing's gonna be Tears of the Kingdom? Like, I don't know. I don't know if this is gonna be Tears of the Kingdom, but like, we got Spider-Man 2 coming out this year. We got Starfield. I mean, I don't know if Starfield's going to be Game of the Year material. We'll have to wait and see. But Baldur's Gate 3 has been such a phenomenon in the games industry for the last month now. And I don't feel like it should be as rare as it is to find a game of this quality, to see that they took a level of care that was conducive to like making sure that a bug-riddled mess didn't get pushed out to the public. I don't think that should be the exception to the rule. I think the correct way to go about it is you pay for a product, you get your money's worth in quality of content, in quantity of content, and there's quality control on the other end to make sure that there's no issues with your enjoyment or anything interfering with your enjoyment of that game. And I feel like every single game studio needs to take a page out of Larian's book, and they need to adopt that level of care for every IP going forward. This is one of the best games of the year, and I think if more games adopt this attitude in the future, more games adopt this method of game development in the future, then the games industry would be a really good place You know, it would be a wonderful world. But yeah, overall, I think Baldur's Gate 3 is just a masterpiece of a game, and I think you should go out and buy it. I think that's all I have time for today, guys. So if you liked the video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye now.